gonna make some butterscotch pudding now, and the first thing that you wanna do is start with your caramel. So we're gonna take dark brown sugar because the flavor is gonna be much more enhanced by that molasses that's in the dark brown sugar. And we're gonna take some water. And the first thing you wanna put into the pot is the water, so that as soon as the sugar hits the bottom of the pot, it'll start to dissolve a little bit. So we wanna take a spoon and go ahead and stir that very gently. I'm gonna take my little spatula. And you want to try and find the smallest pot possible to cook this in because you definitely need your thermometer to reach the bottom of the pot. So I want to dissolve this first and then turn it on low and start to actually melt the sugar. And then we're going to take a temperature and get it to 245 degrees. The next step while your sugar is starting to dissolve is to mix your egg yolks and your cornstarch mixture here. So I have my cornstarch and the egg yolks and the salt, and I'm gonna mix this together in a bowl where I can pour some of my liquid solution into, so make sure it's big enough, and just whisk this together until it's a smooth paste. Once that doesn't show any dry signs of the cornstarch, you can let that sit. And I'm going to actually wash off my whisk so I can use that in here when I add the butter. And then I'm also going to wash my spatula because I don't want to introduce anything dirty back into my sugar. It's starting to bubble here. When it completely bubbles, I'm going to show you how to wash down the sides of the pot. Once our sugar is completely bubbling, I'm going to actually take a clean pastry brush and some water and brush down the sides of my pot to ensure that there's no undissolved sugar crystals, which will reemerge later on. We don't want our pudding to be gritty. So we're gonna do this just once it all comes to a boil, and then do not disturb it. So I'm not going to stir any of this the entire time, but I will place a thermometer in. You don't need to place the thermometer until it is gone maybe a couple minutes so that you can really wash the sides without this being in the way. In order to get a really good reading, if you have one of the clip thermometers, you can do that, but please make sure that the actual thermometer part is reading inside of the sugar. You might need to tilt it depending on the size of your pot. So I do not want to touch the bottom of the pan, and I do want 245. So right now I'm about 225. So I'm going to go a little bit longer, placing the pot down on the heat. Just to get ready my next ingredient, I have my butter handy. That's gonna go in right after I reach 245. When your sugar's getting close, you'll notice that the bubbles will be popping a little bit slower, creating larger bubbles, and becoming a little more syrupy. So I'm gonna take the temperature. It's really important you get to the right temperature and not go over. We are there. I'm gonna turn the heat off for a minute. You really want the caramel flavor in this butterscotch pudding, so it's critical that you use not only the dark brown sugar, but you do get it to the right temperature. My butter was softened already, so it incorporates very quickly, and now I can go ahead and turn my heat back on very low, making sure I whisk that butter in so it's evenly distributed. The next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna add our dairy directly to this. Now this is gonna bubble up a little bit, so we wanna make sure we're very cautious and adding it gently but slowly, and then stirring. And then if your liquid is really cold, it will seize up. But if it's, kind of room temperature, it should incorporate really nicely. So adjust the heat so that when you add your milk and your cream, that you are going to get a nice even consistency mixture. We don't want any lumps of sugar in there. So in case you do happen to get that and it seizes up on you, continue to melt it out until it is smooth. I'm going to increase the temperature of this before I start adding it into my egg mixture because I simply want this to thicken very quickly when I place it back over the stove. This is all about controlling the heat. So if your flame is too high, you'll curdle this very quickly. And if your flame is too low, it's going to take you a very long time to thicken it. So we want to make sure that it's just starting to simmer, and then I'm ready to temper it into my egg mixture. So my dairy and sugar mixture has just started bubbling around the outside edge. And so what I'm gonna do is turn this down so I have more control. That's the main thing, is that you can do this while it's really hot, but you have very little control over it. So the more I can turn it down, the more control I have, and therefore I won't curdle the custard as much. So what I wanna do is a process called tempering. And my handle is hot, so I'm gonna take a towel and grab right underneath here, and I'm going to very, very gently, a little bit at a time, add the hot liquid to my egg mixture. If I add too much at a time, I'm going to shock it and it'll actually start to cook. So I want to slowly bring the temperature up. I'm going to add about a third to half of this mixture to loosen this up, and then we'll go back into my pot. So that's about good right there. Place this back on the heat, make sure that it is on low still, and you can always adjust it after. And then I'm gonna go the opposite direction, always whisking while you're pouring in. So now I'm going to go ahead and whisk this while pouring it in. If I go too slow, then you just take too much time. So a nice steady stream the whole time while I'm whisking, mainly getting into the corners of my pot. I do not have a rounded pot, but if you happen to have a rounded bottom sauce pot, that works the best. So really be vigorous. You cannot slow this down. The faster you go, the smoother that is. You see how immediately started to thicken on me. I'm turning the heat down a little bit more, and what I'm looking for is this to bubble, and you'll see little bubbles that form, and I want to cook it for 1 minute. So we're going to give it, I turned it down a little too much. So you can see it kind of bubbling. So I want to cook it for 1 minute while stirring extremely vigorously so nothing will burn on the bottom or start to coagulate too thick. And this will help cook that starchiness out of the pudding. And then we're immediately going to strain this through a strainer and then add my vanilla extract. If I add the vanilla in this stage, then it will just evaporate off because it's an alcohol base, and we won't retain as much of the flavor. So we want to just literally cook this for a minute and then remove this from the stove. So I remove this from the stove. I have my mise en place set up, so I have my strainer over another bowl, and I'm going to pour this out into there. Again, do not overcook this custard because you will start to get a very grainy texture, and that's not very appealing. We're looking for something very smooth. It's okay to scrape the bottom as long, again, as it's smooth and it's very quick. But if you notice any scrambled egg looking parts in there, then you definitely need to make sure you do not scrape the bottom. So I'm going to take a spatula and just spread that through, and you'll see why I do this process, because now I've caught some of the coagulated egg particles there, and I don't want that in my texture. So I'm going to scrape the bottom, and then what you would do is either pour it directly into your containers, or you can place this in the refrigerator or on an ice bath with saran wrap right over the top. So the last thing I want to do is I want to add my little bit of vanilla extract right into there. That'll really enhance the flavor. If you want to add a little more salt, it will be more of a salted caramel kind of butterscotch pudding. This does not have a very dark color, but it has a really rich flavor. So what I've done is set up my dessert cups here, and I have this filled with little brownie pieces, and I'm going to place my custard in the cups, and once it cools and sets on top, I have some caramel sauce that I'm going to go ahead and place on top, and that is my dessert cup. So you can serve this solo, or you can do a composed dessert with this. So my custards have set up now. They're not moving, and now is a perfect time to add my caramel. So I just warmed my caramel sauce, and I'm going to pour it on the top so that it pretty much encompasses the whole top layer. So you can just kind of swirl it around, and then it helps protect the top of the butterscotch. And then if you want to decorate it, you can always sprinkle a little bit of sea salt, and you can put some crunchy cocoa nibs on there. You can always add some whipped cream to it, put a spoon in it, and you have a great dessert. So these are our butterscotch budinos with brownie bites and crunchy cocoa nibs.